I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Sarah Sunshine Holloway. That is my real legal name, and I love it, so I use the whole thing. And I'm the Teen Services Librarian for Tacoma Public Library. This event is aimed at teens and adults, so it may look like it's mostly adults in here, but you would be surprised every once in a while a teen will turn their camera on and you're like, oh, a teen actually did come to one of these events. Before we get started, there's a couple of things I just wanted to mention. First of all, this is a partnership program between Tacoma Public Library and Right 253, who are our amazing partners, and we've been working with them for a couple of years. And they have worked with us to host some great workshops and panels. And the next thing I need to cover is we have a little, just a little disclaimer, like our rules of behavior, what we expect from people, and to let you know what to expect from this event. So I'm going to read that real quick, and then I'm going to turn it over to Michael Haflinger, the CEO of Right 253. So here it is. Tacoma Public Library is committed to fostering an inclusive, supportive, and respectful environment, whether in person or online. We will not tolerate harassment in any form. Library staff will remove anyone who fails to follow this policy. Library staff may end this event if necessary due to harassment or Zoom bombing. Please note that this program may be recorded for library publicity and use, and a recording could be shared on our social media platforms or hosted on our public YouTube channel. If you have privacy concerns, please turn off your camera and or use only your first name. I like to think of that as the be excellent to each other credo. So just be kind and you're good to go. And I will be here watching in the background just to make sure if anything goes awry, someone's paying attention. So thank you so much for coming. And now I'm going to turn it over to Michael Haflinger. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm really excited about this panel discussion this evening. My name is Michael Haflinger. I'm the Executive Director for Right 253. We're a literary arts organization based here in Tacoma who works primarily with teenagers and young adults. And we've been hosting, like Sarah said, events with the Tacoma Public Library for going on 4 years now, I think. And we've been doing these virtual events since lockdown took place last year. And the first panel discussion that we did was a joint conversation between a poet, a fiction writer, and a songwriter, all of whom were talking about a single topic, which was setting. And it went so well that I wanted to sort of keep that ball in the air and incorporate more of these kinds of conversations of different kinds of writers, different kinds of scholars, researchers, and folks from around the community, all talking about one topic. And so tonight's conversation is in that spirit. And I'll say before I hand it over to Kim, who is going to be our moderator for tonight's conversation, that if anybody out there has an idea for one of these kinds of panels that you would like to see put in place, you know, like an astronomer and a golf pro and a graphic novelist talking about backspin, that'd be great. Let me know. I want to hear all the ideas, however far out they may seem. I think this is a great forum for this kind of discussion. So I will also say that I'm going to be DJing the event, that is DJing the chat. So if you have questions, I'll make sure that those questions get saved for our Q&A at the end. And I will also be posting any kind of links or resources that are mentioned throughout. So if you miss anything, feel free to back channel me on the chat and I'll get it to you. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Kim Davenport, who is the Communications Manager for Tacoma Historical Society. And take it away, Kim. Thank you all.
All right, thank you so much for hosting this event. I've been very excited about it ever since we first started talking about it. So my name is Kim Davenport, and I am Communications Manager for Tacoma Historical Society, as Michael mentioned. I wear lots of hats, and tonight I get to wear my favorite hat, which is local history researcher and writer, talking to other local history researchers and writers. That's my favorite hat. I also have my music hat. That's pretty much a favorite too. But I want to start us off just with some introductions so that people can get to know who is on this panel. And I will start with just a bit more about how I got into local history work, and then I will turn it over to our other panelists to introduce themselves as well. I really got into local history, as I think many people do, by wanting to know more about my own roots, knowing that they are quite deep in Tacoma, and also knowing that I didn't necessarily understand them completely. That's what first brought me to the Northwest Room and to doing local history research. And over the last decade or so, it has led to several articles and a few books now. My particular area of interest is in local arts history, and specifically local music history, as that really ties together my varied interests. But I think it's true for a lot of people that it's often a personal story that brings us to these kind of conversations and this kind of research. And I know that's a theme we'll hear when we hear from others tonight as well. So without further ado, I think I'd like to start with a researcher and writer who I have enormous respect for, and who was the recipient of this year's Murray Morgan Award from the Tacoma Historical Society, which recognizes outstanding work in local history writing. So Tamiko, would you like to introduce yourself and share maybe your story of how you got into this work and what it is that you do?
Great. Thanks, Kim. That's a really lovely introduction. I appreciate it. Thanks, Michael, for having us here. Thanks to Tacoma Public Library. I'm just really happy to be here. Let's see, I truly fell into public history and local history when I was looking into the history of this memorial that was being dedicated downtown for Tacoma's Japanese language school. And I had lived in Tacoma for 10 years and had no idea that we had a language school. In looking into the language school, I discovered that we had a Japantown before World War II, and I had no idea that that had existed either. And it's been a subject that just really hasn't let me go. So from there, I did a couple of articles for HistoryLink, which is the online state encyclopedia. I organized with Michael Sullivan a Day of Remembrance to commemorate the forced removal of Japanese Americans from Tacoma. When I was giving a talk about Tacoma's Japantown, Senator Rosa Franklin, which you can't see here, oh, there she is, asked me to basically become her biographer and oral historian. And so I've been really just looking at the history of places and of people, and I'm super interested in what's there and what's not there. I've been thinking about that for quite some time, so I'm super excited to be here with everybody. I think I'll end there and pass it to the next person.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you for being a part of this. I always love talking to you, so it's a pleasure to get a chance to
see you again.
So I'd like to introduce our next panelist, professor at the University of Puget Sound, Laura Kroukhoff, and someone who I know has both utilized local history research here and also in other places in her own writing, and also incorporates it into her teaching, getting students excited about doing this kind of research, which is also something I love to do. It's often I get some rolling of eyes from students who think, oh, we're doing history, that sounds boring, and I really work hard to make sure they understand, no, it's not boring, it's very exciting, and here's why. So Laura, tell us more about who you are and the work that you do in this area.
Thank you. And like Tamiko, I want to express my appreciation to Tacoma Public Library, to Write 253. I'm really happy to be here. So yes, I teach in the English department at the University of Puget Sound. I've been there since 2014. I am a fiction writer primarily, although I've done some sort of essay, memoir-y work as well. And I came into thinking about historical research and how that might inform my own creative work maybe 20 years ago, when someone sort of offhand mentioned to me that I grew up in Indiana. That was not mentioned to me, that I've always known. I was there. I grew up in Indiana. I grew up in a Quaker community there. And about 20 years ago, someone mentioned offhand that they knew that there had been a Quaker pastor, a woman Quaker pastor in the early 20th century, who'd been extremely influential in Indiana. and very influential in the kind of evangelical revivalist movement of the early 20th century. And also this woman was, to greater and lesser degree, clandestine organizer of the Women's Ku Klux Klan. And I just thought, holy Toledo, how is that possible? How is someone both a Quaker and a Klanswoman? And so that was just kind of knocking around in my brain for a really long time. And 4 years ago, I had a research sabbatical. And so I went back to Indiana. I went to Earlham College, which is a Quaker college in Indiana, and where her papers and her one published book are. And I got to reading to try to figure out who this woman was. And I kind of discovered that there was actually a not insignificant overlap between some Ku Klux Klan activity in Indiana in the 1920s and the Quaker community. So that is like all the fodder I've been kind of wading through for the past handful of years. And I'm currently in the writing process now, trying to move from like taking it in to now putting something out, to trying to do something with that. And as I was going in that direction with my own creative work, I was asked, or sort of suggested to me, that I could develop a 400 level senior capstone course for our creative writing students, and kind of take it as I wanted to. And I thought, oh, research and writing, that's what I want my students to do. And so I kind of took on a course that had been built by another colleague, and centered it on each student creating a research agenda, and then from that, developing a creative project. And I'll probably talk more about that later. But that's really where I've come to intersect with Tacoma history, as my students have delved in, both in the archives at the University of Puget Sound and elsewhere. So that's what I'm looking forward to talking about more.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm very excited about your course. I teach a similar course at UW Tacoma that I call Musical History of Tacoma. And I think lured the students in with the word music in the title, but it's really a class in how to do local history research and write about exciting topics. So it's really fun work to pass that on to another generation. So our final panelist that I'd like to introduce is Spencer Bowman, who is a wonderful resource as a librarian in the Northwest Room at the Tacoma Public Library. And he will be sharing quite a bit more a little bit later on in our conversation about resources at the Northwest Room. But first, I would like to just give him a chance to introduce himself. So Spencer, take it away.
Thanks, Kim. Yeah, my name is Spencer Bowman. I'm a librarian here in the Tacoma Public Library's Northwest Room, which is in the main branch downtown. And I started here working on my capstone from UW. I digitized the portion of the art collection from the artist Thomas Hanforth, and I got into this work in a few ways, but I got into working at generally at the Tacoma Public Library, just looking around, reaching out while I was in library school. And I had recently moved here from Seattle. I grew up in Seattle, but moved down here and visited the library and was blown away by the Northwest Room, its uniqueness. Ilona and Brian Kamens, who used to work here, and Ilona maintain hand-built databases of local history, which I'd never seen anybody do anything like that anywhere else. And I thought, wow, this is unique. I want to be a part of this. And from there, began working here. And since Brian's retirement, I've taken over duties with the Buildings Index and other collections like that. And I just enjoy making things available and accessible. And there's so much we have so much backlog of things coming out. We're working on a new database that's going to be released soon, which our newest librarian, Anna Trammell, has been helping with her expertise on bringing a lot of items that yet nobody has seen, that we've had in our collection seen. So stay tuned for that. But I'll talk a little bit more about, like Kim said, the collections later, but that's me. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much. So now we know who's here. And just to give everyone a sense of what we will be doing in this conversation, I have a series of questions for primarily for our authors, and I may chime in on some of these as well. Just kind of getting at how we do the work that we do. And then after we work through those questions, Spencer has a short presentation that can share with everyone tuned in what some of those resources are that I'm sure we're all going to talk about in the wonderful Northwest room. So that's coming up. And then after we get done with both of those things, we'll have some time for Q&A. So if you have questions at any point, definitely put those into the chat and we will answer as many as we can at the end. So I want to jump in with a first question, and I will answer it quickly myself, and then I'll turn it over to whoever else would like to jump in. But the first question is just, what inspired you to write utilizing historical materials? So, as opposed to, writing fiction or in some other format, what inspired you to write specifically utilizing archival materials? And I will share that for me, absolutely the in for me was looking at photographs. There's that old adage of, a picture tells 1,000 words. And every time I've stumbled on a historic photograph that I haven't seen before, I'm fascinated with how many details, if you really study that photo, how many details reveal themselves about not just the obvious subject, like maybe a person or a building, but what are all the other things we can find out from that picture, and how many of those do I need to research to understand better what I'm looking at from 1890 or 1975 or whatever it might be. So for me, that was my in, and that's what made me want to start, telling stories using artifacts. But whoever else would like to jump in on that, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
I can jump in, I think, if that's okay. For me, it was a map. Yeah, and I, again, when I was researching the Japanese language school and the memorial, I came across this book, which is called Furusatsu by Ron Magden. It's a history of Tacoma's Japanese in Tacoma and Pierce County. And in the book, there's this hand-drawn map. Magden did not cite the source, so I had to find that out later where that came from. But it was a hand-drawn map of Japantown, and it had a ton of different. It's a map of the downtown core from approximately 11th Street down to about 17th to 19th Street. It includes what's now the History Museum, Union Station, all of that, the courthouse, and written on that map, there were a ton of little Japanese names and, different businesses and things. And that alone blew me away. I was like, all these Japanese names. And then I saw this business that said Uwajima Ya, which is, as we might know, in the Northwest, this big Pan-Asian supermarket that's now in Seattle. And that alone just knocked me over. I'm like, we could have had Uwajima in a town. This is crazy. Oh, hi, Joe. To have that map alone was just incredible. And I was like, there's so much more that I don't know and that I need to know really badly. So there's the map, right? But also I think the other source of things that drives my history writing is that my family was incarcerated during World War II. My dad and his parents and siblings as Japanese Americans living in California. So I've always had that, for better or worse, that really deep connection to that history. And so I've always wanted to do different things with it, artistically, creatively, but the history thing was not something that I knew I could write until I met Justin Wadland, and he was the one who roped me into writing for HistoryLink, the online state encyclopedia. So the map, and then my own family history.
And I'll hop in and say I got interested in archival research coming kind of from the position of a reader. And as a little kid, I'd always loved historical fiction. I was just like a giant fan of historical fiction. It was not something I'd ever written myself, but I just loved it. I still do in a lot of ways. And and maybe I can think of a moment in graduate school when another peer was workshopping a piece of fiction, and it was about, it wasn't necessarily historical fiction, but it was about the VA. The VA, the Veterans Affairs, was sort of a central fact in this piece of fiction. And as we were kind of talking about it, we all discovered that he didn't really know much about the VA. Like, they were just like facts about the way the VA works that he just didn't know about. And I remember him saying, like, it's just fiction, right? Like, it's just fiction. And I thought, oh man, no, like we've got to have a much more sort of careful relationship to our subjects as fiction writers. And particularly that kind of phrase, truth is stranger than fiction. Sometimes you have to recognize, right, like what you can and can't make up based on what did and did not happen. And of course, that always being contested as well, right? What did and what did not happen, and how do we know that? And what is the evidence for that? And so as I, was rolling around this kind of this idea or this notion, this surprising notion that a person could be these two things, right? Could be Quaker and also a Ku Klux Klan person. I got really, the thing I wanted to know was the truth of that. I want to write fiction about it, but to be able to write fiction about it, I wanted to get to the truth of it. And so I just really started trying to figure out where those documents are. She shows up in scholarly history here and there, and I love it when I see her name, but I knew I wanted to go to, especially since she was sort of where I was from, I wanted to go to that town where she ministered. I wanted to stand outside of the church that she preached in. I wanted to be in the library that holds like one of two extant copies of her book. And so that's really where it went for me. I discovered as I became interested in writing fiction in this vein that I needed a tool kit, right? I needed a different kind of toolkit so that I could say something real and genuine and true, even as I was seeking to write fiction.
It's a really wonderful segue actually into the next question I wanted to ask, which is, in addition to the wonderful resources at the Northwestern, which we will definitely talk a lot about tonight, what are some of where are some of those collections? What are some of the resources that you've used in your work? Do you want to take that one first, Laura, because you were kind of just starting to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So I was interested in a rare book that exists actually at Earlham College, and I think ironically, quite close to us, George Fox University has the other copy of this book. So I drove all the way across the country to the state of Indiana to read this book, and I could have driven down the road to George Fox and probably will the next time. But so it was this rare book that I wanted to get my hands on. There was another rare book that came up in my research that was written by a contemporary of my primary subject, and is a sort of salacious, probably false memoir of a woman who describes herself as an escaped nun, and she ostensibly was kind of coerced into the Catholic convent, experienced atrocities there, eventually escaped, wrote this memoir, and also got linked up with the Ku Klux Klan and was on this sort of speaking tour, like book tour. And she would show up in these little towns and read from her memoir about the convent and kind of work everybody up into an anti-Catholic fervor. So that it is not in any library anywhere. And I spent a lot of time on like rare book sites and eBay, and I tracked down a copy and bought it back in maybe 2010. And I remember it coming in the mail and being sort of excited about it and alarmed and horrified by it, and a family member said, "Congratulations, Laura, on acquiring your first piece of 20th century American hate literature." I was like, yeah, thank you. It's really distressing to have it in my hands, but I really wanted it as well. And it also turned out to be really useful to be looking at historical newspapers. So I was reading The American Friend, which was a weekly nationally circulating newspaper in the Quaker community under different titles for most of a century. So historical newspapers are quite the rabbit hole to go down. And again, because I was in an archive that had them in physical form, I was looking at these big books of newspapers, and that there was just something so wonderful about that full page and opening the book and turning the crinkly old leaves of these newspapers from the 1920s. So those were resources that really grabbed me.
Yeah, the newspaper, you know, we're very lucky in Tacoma with historic newspapers because we have the Northwestern has them on microfilm. Tacoma Historical Society has those old books, you know, the big thick books, and you can just page through. And it's such a wonderful, you know, often as a researcher, you're looking for something specific. And so you might know, okay, there was this article on this date, but then you look at the next page and you find something that you never knew about or never heard of, or even just trivial things like what was being advertised as being on sale at the department store. And, you know, and it gives you a different sense of the reality of the daily lives of people around the same time as this tiny narrow thing that you're researching. And it's tremendously helpful. And we are very lucky in Tacoma to have such easy access to all of those resources. And I know it's more than what some communities have. So, you know, whatever direction you'd like to take that question, Tamiko, because I know you've worked on a few different types of projects over the last few years. So what types of resources have you found yourself using?
Oh my gosh. So, you know, I should start by saying really that my training is in literature and American ethnic studies. And so to branch out beyond into the wider world of historical research and, you know, really to do Senator Franklin's biography and then the graphic novel about Japanese American incarceration. So many sources I can't even tell you, but you know, there are things that will just come up and you think, I wonder what that is, right? So one of the things when I was writing Senator Franklin's biography was she was very taken with this steamship trip that she had done right after she got married, right? And she said, I sailed on the Ile-de-France. And I was like, oh, that sounds kind of familiar. I wonder what that is. And lo and behold, the Ile-de-France was a huge steamship luxury liner. She did not travel luxury class, but there are pictures of what that boat looked like, what it was on the inside. And it was this the ship that was mentioned in a Cole Porter, I think it was a Cole Porter song. You're something as the Ile-de-France. I haven't got a chance. This is a fine romance, right? That's the Ile-de-France that she sailed on. And so it was this incredible sort of rabbit hole of things. So when I actually got to writing about it, because it's something that she remembered very well, she has the menu from her time on the ship still. She, you know, talked a lot about just, you know, that trip to Europe being, you know, right after World War II, practically. So 45, I think, is when she took that trip. And so she, it made such a mark on her. I had to find out more about what that was, right? So I think part of maybe what I wanted to tell people about is just that curiosity, right, behind just some little name that kind of niggles at you, because you never know where that's going to take you, right? There was also, and I'm still looking for these copies, so if anybody has it, there was an African-American newspaper in Tacoma, and she had a copy of it because she had a picture in it registering voters. And we did a little bit of digging, calling around, and maybe someone has these copies still. The editor of the paper is no longer with us. So I'm hopeful that when we start to dig into these community archives with the Tacoma Public Library Community Archives Project, that these are the kinds of things that we'll be able to dig out collectively from basements, from attics, from boxes. A lot of the history that I do is not super covered, right, by the mainstream press. It's not necessarily covered in mainstream history books. And so anyway, the histories of communities of color, right, in Tacoma, you know, there's some fantastic resources in Northwest Room. The clipping file was one that I went to frequently. Maybe Spencer can talk about that a little bit, but things like that were so fantastic, but a lot of it is not super collected, curated, and I suspect a lot of it is in these, you know, sort of community files that I hope we'll get to dig into. Just to briefly mention that archives project, the Asia Pacific Cultural Center and I will be co-hosting a community archives workshop on November 10th in the evening from 6 to 7. It'll be virtual. We'll be sending out more information certainly about the workshop, but just wanted to put that into people's brains for a little later. Really, there's so much, I think, that is still unfolding and still to be uncovered that I hope we can collectively curate and preserve and document and celebrate together.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that into the conversation. I think anyone who's watching right now and anyone who's maybe watching a recording of this later, you know, spread the word in our community about this wonderful project that the library is embarking on, the Community Archives Project, because it's, those of us who do work in this field know that we have huge gaps in our archives and our records. And when we seek out, you know, when we have a project in mind and I want to write a book about this or an article about that, I mean, that was the first lesson I learned in doing this research, is that there are gaps related to of creating archives in the first place, which voices were going to be held up and celebrated and which voices were not.
Yeah, and which organizations have the resources and space and time and staff to actually have archives, right? Like, yes. That's the other piece that I'm just like, somebody's going to tell me more about the colored women's clubs that, you know, I wasn't able to dig into earlier, right? That there's so much, I think, to be uncovered.
Yes. I mean, I think perhaps it might just be on my mind because I just interviewed the author of the book by the Chinese Reconciliation Park Foundation about the Chinese expulsion. So I think that's why it's on my mind. But one of the best examples to me of the you know, the bias that can be inherent in our records is reading Tacoma newspapers from 1885.
Oh yeah.
And you might, you know, as someone in 2021, you might expect to go back and I don't know what someone would expect, but you might be surprised at just how much the newspaper editors supported the Chinese expulsion, you know, and so there's always, you always have to realize when you're looking back at materials, you know, who was behind the camera taking the picture that got saved in an archive, or who was the editor of the newspaper and why did maybe that newspaper get preserved. And we know there were many different ethnic, you know, newspapers around Tacoma that are largely lost. And so just very important that we all recognize that. And it's why it's so wonderful to have this new project with the library that hopefully can help pull together more materials from different people in the community and make those available. So wonderful. Wonderful project that I think we're all very excited about. Spencer, is there anything you'd like to share at this moment about that project?
Yeah, no, I second what everybody said. First, the newspapers, it's, yeah, you can get lost in those, lost in the milieu of the time, and just learn so much about an era. I work with them every day practically, and I'm always, you know, you can see how they preferred to photograph people, who was photographed, yeah, what were people eating. Even the classified ads say a lot about the time. And yeah, they're such a valuable resource. But yeah, like everybody else has been saying, there's also so much left out of them and out of our collections due to many reasons. And yeah, I'm excited about the Community Archives Project as well. Yeah, I'll talk more about the collections later too. Though yeah, it's always interesting. In the image archive, we have lots of images from a collection called the Richards Collection, which was a really important premier photo studio from about the 20s, 30s through the 80s, and being a private or a private company that would take pictures of people who made an appointment to use their services. There's a filter on that, but it's also an interesting filter too, because you do see what people, upper middle class people of the time, decided to photograph. But it's also interesting too, like to counter that, the oral history collection. I've been recently digitizing the centennial cassette tapes of a grant project where a person from the library went out and interviewed immigrant community individuals from the immigrant communities and things like that, where they would never have have a chance to or probably the time or means to write a book, get it published, have the library purchase it, put it in the collection. So yeah, it's I can actually add something. We're going to send out a little email to people after the program to kind of give more resources and highlight some things. And I'll put a link to the community archives, more information on that if people are interested in that. So yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much. Let me move us in a slightly different direction for a second and ask the question of what barriers you've encountered in trying to access information. What challenges have you run into with trying to find things that you need for your research, and just any direction you'd like to take that question.
Well, I could start off just thinking about, I'm not a writer, but barriers trying to find patrons' information has just been kind of the same things we've talked about. Somebody's interested in an individual person, and I have obviously the books in the collection, the newspapers, other repositories that I could tap for possible information. But if it's usually not big enough to have a book written or have many newspapers articles on it, it's difficult to find. And while there are resources where you can keyword search topics in a newspaper, they're like both some of you have touched on already. There's so many newspapers that just due to funds or things like that, they're not digitized yet. So it takes you to the actual physical paper, and you're having to look through and find that, just because the newspapers are probably the most subject rich, just because they're written every day. They're going to have the most detail on life at the time. But yeah, I would say kind of similar to what we're talking about. If it's something that's niche or just a small period that wasn't well documented, it's going to be very difficult to find something and find a lot on it.
Yeah, I guess I could talk a little bit about just curation in archives. For Senator Franklin's book, I went down to the Washington State archives, the legislature's archives, and because she served in the legislature for 20 years, there were about 15 boxes, I think, of her materials from her time in the legislature. And some of that was just, and some of it was definitely like beautifully organized in folders and things like, oh, okay, so correspondence from this time, here's her box of trophies, here's her box of thank yous and whatever else. But there were other boxes that had nothing like that. So I had to kind of sit there with the box, and I couldn't take much with me, right? So if you're doing archival research, a lot of it is, leave your bag in a locker, take, maybe your, phone or a camera to take pictures, a pencil, a notebook, whatever else. And it was done in Olympia. So it was, it was a day to try and get all of that together. So, I mean, curation and the work that libraries do is so crucial. It's such an important part of helping us get our work done, right? I mean, one of the fun things about archival research, though, are the treasures that you don't expect to find, right? That you'll just be paging through this, folder of random correspondence and find something and go, oh, okay, I have to use this. But I wouldn't have known about it. Wouldn't be digitized. It wasn't indexed or anything else like that. So from what I understand, Anna's been doing some work, and you folks at the Northwest Room have done some work specifically on Japanese American history, and are bringing more of a collection together for that, which is super exciting to me. So really, curation and keeping things organized is one of the big barriers that I've worked with and around. And yeah, just kind of, knowing what's there and what's not there at the same time, and having to keep my, one eye on what's there and the other on what's not there has been a rewarding challenge, but definitely a challenge.
Yeah, and I will echo both what Spencer and Tamiko were saying, because on the one hand, I think there's kind of a wild embarrassment of riches when you're delving into something like a newspaper, and that feeling of like, how do you find what, if you're not looking for a particular article or a particular fact, even, you're just kind of looking for like, oh, what was it like in this town in this year? Oh, you've got so much stuff. It's just like all of this information, and how do you choose, and how much time do you spend reading, and when do you just say, okay, enough, I've read enough, or do you need to read one more year of that newspaper? So on the one side, there's like so much, and then exactly what Tamiko was saying, there's also sometimes so little for what you're looking for, and that fact that history, I think if you ever go into an archive, it really hits home that history is a human endeavor. Right? History is not out there somewhere. It's this human endeavor. And if the box is organized and labeled and it's awesome, it is great. And if it's missing, it's missing. And it's just missing. There's like nowhere, there's no ultimate organizer out there who's making sure that we have the information that we need. So I was really struck in a little college archive, how much of what I was discovering was a labor of love for various library employees, right? Some files were just like, oh, this guy got this kind of as his personal project, and he just put it together. And then places where that didn't happen, and there was just no one to have grabbed that ephemera before it went away. Slightly tangentially, while I was at the library, there was kind of a big struggle going on among the archivists about what to do with the fact that they had this giant collection of scrapbooks. These folks who had attended Earlham College and then gone off to do whatever they did, go on trips or study abroad or whatever. And apparently in the kind of middle of the 20th century, these young people were sending back to the library their scrapbooks of their adventures. And nobody knew if they were like paper art or if they were ephemera or what to do with them. And should you take them apart? Should you scan them? Should you keep them whole in their boxes? Are they just worthless? Should they just go? We've got 10 of them. Like, what do we do? And so just watching the librarians around me and the archivists and the curators around me having together these conversations as I'm scribbling away in my little Carol, and they're trying to wrestle with this in real time. Like, what do we do with this? We can't, it's falling apart, right? The glue is eating everything. What are we going to do with this? And I was just really struck at what a human endeavor history is. And we've always got to pay attention to that.
That's a wonderful point. And it gets to all of the challenges we run into and also all the exciting things we find. I'll just add one thought I had as I was listening to everyone share what they shared, which is that challenge of sometimes having far too much information and trying to figure out what is important and what to look at. One of the lessons I've learned about that over the past few years is, and maybe it's just my personality, but this works for me. I need to have a plan. I need to have a structure.
Oh, Kim, you're froze.
My excuse is my work.
Kim, we might have lost you. You're frozen.
Oh no. Well, panelists, do you, I wish I had a question to insert here, but I don't. I wonder if you want to just keep following this thread. It looks like Kim dipped out and maybe is going to try to reconnect. I wonder maybe to kick it over to Spencer, kind of based on what Laura was just talking about, like, what do you do with stuff that you don't necessarily know what else to do with it? Or is that ever up for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're kind of going through some of that right now, where in the past, so in the Northwest Room and in the main branch, the addition so the Northwest Room, if you haven't been there, it's in the Carnegie building that's attached to the main library. And in the basement of the main library, there's a fallout shelter, which is our basement, and there's collections of things of donations of where we keep our physical bound newspapers and the negatives and prints of the many photo collections we have, and because of just the time and energy and staffing, a lot of donations are kind of backlogged. So now that we're a group of 3 in the Northwest Room, Anna has time to kind of go down there and assess things and bring things up, and we kind of mull over, does this fall into South Sound Northwest history? If not, where else can these go? If so, how do we represent these online? And she's been mostly the point person on that just because of her expertise in archives and special collections. But yeah, you try your best to look at it and see, does this, working in the Northwest Room, you kind of have an idea of what has historical value, historical worth, and in a wide range of things. If it's, for instance, there was recently the Days clothing company donation we had from a long time ago. There was a tiny little pair of corduroy pants somebody found that were a demo pant that was sent out to college students to see if to try to inspire people to come and shop at their store. So yeah, it's tough, but if it falls under the parameters of local Tacoma history, will certainly take it. And then from there on out, we'll always look and reach out to somebody like THS or other institutions around to see if this would kind of fit inside their parameters of their collections.
All right, let's see if I'm safely back online.
Yeah, you're back.
Okay, good. My internet crashed for some reason, but I moved location, so hopefully it will help. The excitement of Zoom. So I will finish my thought that I was sharing, and then I have one more question for everyone after that. But just my method of dealing with just the overwhelming nature of what you can find in archives and how it can be too much, and how I get too excited about it and then I get down a rabbit hole. I think it's been about 2 years ago now. I spend about a half an hour each day searching a variety of sources. I go to the Tacoma Library's image archives. I go to the Washington State Historical Society's image collection, and the Tacoma Historical Society collection, and I search by date. I just type in today's date into the search engine, and it works for me because it's first of all, I'm keeping on task and I don't go down rabbit holes. I just do this task, but it's also taught me something amazing about just getting a little snapshot each day of pictures taken on that day. And it's given me much more understanding of what's in all those collections. I've found things that I don't think I ever would have found before, because I'm not looking for, a keyword. I'm just looking by date. And so that's one method I've come up with of, trying to get a handle on both having a better understanding of the scope of collections and their limits, and also potentially making some fun discoveries that I wouldn't find otherwise. So that's been one lesson I've learned about navigating vast archives. So I have one more question that was on my list of things I knew I wanted to ask. And then we can turn things over to Spencer to share more about the Northwest Room. But my last question, this is really for everyone. What's something that you wish members of the general public knew more about library collections and archival collections? What's something you would, if you had a chance to just, talk to the person on the street and tell them something that you think is awesome, or something that you think would help their understanding of the community, or however you'd like to address that question?
I can go first if that's okay. I see Laura thinking, so if that's, I'll just jump in. So for me, again, coming from the literary training that I do, I really came to historical research as a really kind of new, as a new kid. And working with Michael Sullivan really gave me a lot of wonderful depth and training into what's behind a place. A lot of people think that history is just maybe about people or about events, but there's actually a lot about a place, like a very specific location. It could be an address, right, or a house, or a building. And so Michael actually trained me, and we went to the Polk directories at the Northwest Room and looked at one particular address for about a decade or so, just to see who was there, who was attached to it. And then from there, we found names and dug into what the names were about. That there's a lot more than you would think, particularly in the Northwest Room, behind a place. I also did some research on Jean's House of Prayer, which is connected to St. Leo's in the Hilltop in Tacoma. And I knew that Justin Wadlin had told me that a Japanese American woman had owned that house and gave it to Father Bix from St. Leo's Parish. And beyond that, he didn't know anything about that history, but there's a mural of her on the house itself. So I dug into, all of that, and I got to go inside the house, and they have a little shrine basically for her because it was her house. Talked about the murals, how they got there. There's just a lot to dig into behind one specific address, more than you might think.
And I will simply say that for me, and I think that this comes out as I help my students in the class I teach, just the helpfulness of librarians. I have training as a literary scholar. I have training from an MFA in fiction writing. I'm not trained as a historian. No one trained me to do that kind of work. And so I too have come at it as a novice, and my students, even though they're seniors in college and they think they know everything there is to know about the university that they're at, they've never gone into the special collections, quite possibly, in our library. They certainly don't have a fulsome sense of what is there and what they could find. And I think when you don't know, it feels like there's a barrier, right? There's a level where you have to know to be able to go in and make use and be helpful. Do you know how to use a microfiche machine? Are those even in existence anymore? Like, what is the technology? How do you do it? And to just know that someone will help you. All you need is curiosity, and genuinely someone will help you if you walk in the door of a library with some curiosity. And that's so important. I'm not sure that we celebrate that enough.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And anytime I'm working with students, I encounter feedback, which is I honestly, and this still surprises me, but it shouldn't. I talk to students all the time who are seniors in college who tell me that they've never set foot in a physical library, because there's so much available online now. And so the idea of having to go to a space and talk to a stranger without any comfort of, are librarians nice and friendly? Well, yes, they are. And it's that's the one thing I would always share with anyone, is that these are very welcoming spaces, and they want you to come in and they want you to ask questions, and everyone is welcome. And I'm sure Spencer has thoughts on this as well.
Oh yeah, so thanks for the kind words about the Northwestern and librarians. Yeah, it's the best to have people come in and just get them started, and that's really usually all it takes. I remember not last year, but a couple of years ago now, we had a group of students in, and I was giving them a tour, and they had a project to research something from the area. And as I was walking around, I was showing them all the tools we have, such as like the books and the stacks and the maps and the clippings files. And when we got to the newspapers that are on microfilm, I was showing them how to load it and how to scroll. And then somebody's eye caught that an ad for the Tacoma Boys, and this was a newspaper from the 80s, and they blew them away that the Tacoma Boys was around in the 1980s, and they all wanted to read the ad, and just things like that, and people coming in doing research on their house. Just if you take the time and to come in, we'll show you how to just show you the resources and show you how to use them. And it's just, yeah, sometimes it's incredible what you can find out. Like Tamiko said about just starting with an address and everything that happened around it, from images to newspaper article mentions of people that live there and things like that. So yeah, no, it's great. And I'll talk about more about the resources in a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great segue, Spencer, if you'd like to share a little bit more in detail about the wonderful resources at the Northwest Room. I think most people, unless they've actually visited or used them, have no idea the scope and just the amazing amount of information and how well organized it is. So yeah, take it away. share your slides with us.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. So this will just be a really brief overview of our collections. Is that working? Great. And I'm going to send out a little guide here after the program, but just to kind of give you the basics of the Northwestern's online collections, I'll just begin. So all of our collections can be found on our website, www.tacomalibrary.org/northwest-room. On the right-hand side of the homepage, you'll see all of the collections. We have many different collections that contain all sorts of different types of resources. We have an image archives, a building index, a Tacoma Pierce County obituary index, and more. Most of these databases are maintained by us. However, there are also links to external databases such as Ancestry.com and Heritage Quest. There are many different specific indexes and collections for different research needs, such as the Thomas Hanforth collection that includes art and audio related to that artist, the obituary index that lists locations of obituaries in newspapers for genealogy research. Though for this presentation, I'm just going to highlight a few that I thought made most sense with the kind of research we're talking about today. So there's the buildings index, which is a database you can search by address of a building or by the block to see what was going on around that building. The buildings index includes photos and names of previous occupants and citations to where that building was mentioned in the newspaper or in books. The image archive houses over 35,000 images from many different photographers and photo studios. These images are all keyword searchable and downloadable for free. Each photo record includes information on that photo's content, when it was taken, who took it, etc. The local history and biography index includes information and citations to material on roughly 58,000 individuals that shaped the region's past. To search our collections, you click on the collection you're looking at, and then you enter a search term on the upper right-hand screen, and the result will appear at the center of the page like this, and your limiters and subjects are on the right of the page, where you can kind of drill down certain keywords or photographers, etc., like in this example picture. And once you find something that appeals to you or falls into what you're trying to find, you can click that, and then that brings you to the item page. So now you're looking at a single item in our collection, and you can expand that by clicking that little 2 arrow button there on the image itself, and that'll blow it up to its full resolution so you can get more detail. You can download it. There's a little arrow pointing to your hard drive. You can download it, and it gives you options to save it full res, which will be very big, or you can even have smaller versions. And then below the image here, or the item, then there's all these fields. You have a description field, which talks about the content of the photo, who took it, any sort of citation to a newspaper article, anything like that. And then there's subject headings below that, image, date, etc. So that was really brief discussion, but each collection is essentially laid out the same way with the same navigational buttons and tools. And as I mentioned at the start, I will send out a short guide I've worked on for this event tonight that kind of gives a little bit more detail on how to use those collections. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to email us at nwr@tacomallibrary.com. Give us a call, 253-280-2814. We're happy to help you with your research or navigating or any questions you have. Thanks.
Spencer,
Great.
can you just talk a little bit about the clippings file? Because I love them so much. I love them. they're so fun.
Yes, of course. Yeah, the clippings file. So the clippings files are large filing cabinets. So we have up in the Northwest room that are all organized by subject matter. We're like regioned and then subject matter. So we have clippings, and so I should probably define clipping. Clippings are just newspaper clippings, magazine clippings, photocopies, pamphlets, pages from magazines, anything that you could put in a manila folder. And we have, and these have been put together in the library. Oh gosh, I don't know the genesis of the clippings files, but there's clippings from papers dating back to the 1800s in there. It's incredible the amount of resources that are in there, and they've been maintained since they've been created. So you never know what you're going to find in there either. I mean, there's just today I was going through Tacoma parks. There's biographies, any mention of like Frank Herbert or Verna Hafer or any of these people, even lesser known people. I'm always surprised to see what I find in there. There was an Asian American pottery person, someone from the city was interested in. I'd never heard of this person, was able to find information really easily. So we're happy to, if you have any questions or you're looking for more information, we can certainly scan things, send them to you. I know we're closed except for appointments in the Northwest room, but we're always happy to see what we can find. And yeah, can I, what did you find in the clippings files when you were looking in there, Tamiko?
Oh my gosh. So let's see. One of the things that I researched was the Tacoma Buddhist temple, right? This is how I dug into the history of a building. And so part of what I was looking at were things on the temple itself. And we found some of that stuff in the clippings file on, I think, the Japanese Americans, and maybe Buddhism might have been the other kind of header that we looked at, or folder. When I was researching Tacoma's Japantown and looking at the kind of Japanese American related files in there, there was this wonderful clipping that might not have been digitized, that it was this long reminiscence by Dr. Ryo Munekata, who lived in Tacoma's Japantown as a young man and had these wonderful map-like memories of what it was like to live in that neighborhood before the war. And he was like, and next to this, there was this sweet shop. And then I would walk uphill to this photography studio, whatever it was, right, that he did. And so that, I don't know if it was indexed necessarily anywhere. It was something that I had just found in the clippings file alone. So just one of those hidden treasure kinds of spaces.
Yeah, I would second that. It's, so many things are indexed and you can search by keyword, or you can, what you're looking for. But since I've been devoting myself to sharing musical stories from Tacoma history. I a couple of years ago, before the pandemic, obviously, because I spent a whole afternoon there, pulled out all of the files on music, musical organizations, musicians. So, you know, I went through several filing cabinets, took me several hours, and I think more than one day now that I think back on it. But what's so wonderful is you do find things that you wouldn't find any other way. It's an amazing collection. And you find, you know, people that in the case of biographies, I found people I knew I would find because I already had some background in the area. But then right next to that would be someone I'd never heard of. And so just that way of finding that sort of needle in a haystack of, you know, and maybe that story is a really fascinating story and deserves to be told. So yeah, just the range of materials in the Northwestern is incredible. And it's, I think you're doing a great job during the pandemic of still serving people effectively. I've heard that from my students, but I'm really excited about when things can open up a little bit more, because it's, for me at least, it's been a place to just go explore. And I think anyone who has any interest in learning more about Tacoma history would enjoy that kind of exploration. Just showing up one day, maybe with a question in mind, but seeing where it takes you. So that's what the Northwestern has been so great for, I think. Is there anything that I didn't ask that is just pressing on anyone's imagination or anyone's mind that you'd like to bring into the conversation before we answer questions that might come up?
I had one question, and I have actually been thinking, or just curious about how you keep things organized during your research. Because do you use software? Are you using and just writing things down? How do you do that?
I have a binder per project usually. And then I also have, so Justin, librarian, taught me to use Zotero as a way to index my sources and keep it all nice and tidy for a bibliography or for records. And then, yeah, I kill a lot of trees. So I do print out a fair amount and keep it in my binders. And other than that, I mean, for the graphic novel, we did so much research that I can't even tell you how we kept it organized that well, but lots and lots of folders with little, you know, indexes and things like that. But yeah, binders and file folders are my friends.
Yeah, and I will say I should just like learn and do better on that front, because I have like 2 file folders which are full of everything, right? Which does not actually help you. So yeah, I currently have way too many images of you know, newspaper pages and unorganized, you know, scans of various things that I hope one day to put in better order than they're in.
Yeah, that's my challenge as well. And I tend to be organized in every other area of my life, but for some reason I have trouble in this area. So I'm open to suggestions.
There's so many things, right? I mean, actually, I have this. Might not be able to see it on screen. Yep, you can't see it on screen. So you know those like magazine holders that people have. One of my relatives was, when he was writing a book, he kept those magazine holders, and he basically threw everything that he had for a chapter, right, or a piece of his manuscript or a piece of his book into a different magazine holder. And then when he was done, I think maybe he put it together into binders or whatever, but that was another trick that and was just, I'm a visual person, so it was nice to see, okay, yes, chapter 5, right, throw it there. And the binders are really, I mean, it's an old-fashioned thing, but it's really great. I did an article about Bob Mizukami, who was mayor of Fife, put together, you know, a ton of different things and printouts and, you know, things that I'd organized. And when I was done with the article, I was able to give the binder to his family. So that was really exciting to me.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges that I've run into in this area is that you do have physical materials and then you also have digital materials. And that, I think that's what's hard for my brain about how do I, without printing everything out, because I do want to try to be sensitive about not using too many trees. How do you manage, some things are digital, some things are physical. That's my biggest challenge. But if it's all right with everyone, why don't we see what questions are out there? I know Michael's been watching the chat, and also anyone who wants to put something new into the chat or ask a question. I think we have a good amount of time to answer some questions.
Yeah, it looks like Anna brought up, yes, Scrivener. And yeah, Scrivener is so fantastic for large projects. I have to say, if anybody hasn't used it, it's a software program designed for writers. And I think really for writers with big projects, you can toggle very easily between parts. You can create little folders, and to have it all very easily accessible and easy to navigate between. You don't have to sit there and like click open your Word folder and then click open your Word document and all of that. You can have it in what they call binders, and you can just kind of click in between parts really easily. Scrivener is really great, and it's such a powerful tool. I haven't even unlocked all of what it can do, but word counts and different color highlights and lots of lovely things. Scrivener's great.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that because and I just have, in the library, we have systems in place to organize things. Like you have hierarchical organization, you have relational organization, you have Dewey, you have things like that. But yeah, sometimes I'm looking, going through a book and I'm looking at the bibliography and I'm just thinking, how do these authors keep all this stuff straight? There's just so many little places to look for information and then to organize that. So I actually asked that question because that comes up a lot to me, like for some of these people kind of new, kind of give them a direction. So yeah, thank you both for answering that.
Can I ask a question?
Please do.
I'm sorry, I feel like I'm a little bit out of it here, out in the distance. I'm in Maine, but I'm writing a book about Tacoma. That's where my grandparents were from, and I'm writing a book about my grandmother, the bootlegger. Anyway, I'm kind of curious. I thought, is it Tamiko or Tamiko?
It's Tamiko, actually.
Tamiko.
Yes.
I'm thinking you're probably in a similar boat, because my people didn't really register on the social register, and I'm thinking Japanese people were probably kind of in a similar boat as the Irish. How do you find them? How do you find information from way back in the 20s and such? I mean, because they weren't in the papers as much unless they were arrested, for my people, not yours.
Right.
Unfortunately, my people do show up there.
So, I mean, I have the benefit of having, a couple of really great books, honestly, that do a pretty good job of detailing at least some of the life of Japanese Americans pre-war. There are 3 books that I can think of off the top of my head, but they are all very specifically Japanese American focused.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think this is actually a question to Spencer, honestly, to see what he can help us with. The fringes of society, right, are something that people don't really document as well, right? There's this whole, I think, dissertation or master's thesis that someone did on Japanese prostitutes in the Northwest. So, and that's a whole, amazing piece of research there. And there's a little bit about the kind of fringe Japanese American neighborhood in Tacoma where there is more of a red light district and so on.
Well, I'm not going there. I mean, I wasn't suggesting that at all. I'm just thinking,
no, sure.
My people were kind of rough and ready, a little bit, they could be troublemakers. In fact, that's why my grandmother's an interesting book. But
Sure.
yeah, I'm not thinking the Japanese were like that, but I'm thinking that they were not the hoity-toity people who got the society page
covered, right? Yeah, no, yeah. Spencer will probably have better answers to this as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a few avenues you could take, and you're right. There's not going to be like a full page spread on the family and like the society page, like you said, but you can there's a few resources. There's ancestry.com. There's city directories, which we kind of talked about briefly, where those were at the time kind of like the phone book, but a little bit different, where they would have information on the by address or by occupations. One even has like what car they drove, the address of where they worked, and then you can kind of track them through time with those, and then you can take the information you find from the directories, and go to Ancestry and see what biographical information you can find on Ancestry. We can look at newspapers and see if there's any mention of, just a short little, maybe they were in the news. There was so much news printed.
I'm loving newspapers.com.
I was just going to recommend.
Mine.
Yeah.
In fact, that's where I found out a lot of the criminal background. I shouldn't keep going on this, but no, I'll leave you for your other people. But yeah, there's a lot.
If you have names, you can email nwr@tacomalibrary.com and I can take a look and see what I can find and get back to you.
Yeah, I'd love that. I've been through what I can find online.
Okay.
And you might be able to better direct me. I might be going down the wrong path or something, but I don't want to take up all your time. You've got a lot of people there who have questions. So, like Jody.
Yeah, it looks like Jody had a question. If you want to jump in, Jody, you're welcome to.
Ah, there. I was talking to myself. This is just wonderful. I saw Kim's presentation elsewhere and it was just fascinating. Just all the stuff about Tacoma music. I grew up here. And I used to work at the News Tribune when it was the Tacoma News Tribune. And it's fascinating to hear that you have clippings on file in the Northwest Room. It's very frustrating because I was there, and when I left, it was when the paper sold. And they ended up, a lot of the reporters ended up burning the managing editor in effigy, because he had destroyed much of the newsroom library files. And I know that the Northwest Room was twisted in knots. And you still see in the newspaper, you still see that the credits go to somebody other than the News Tribune when we had it all. I worked in the library, in the newsroom. So it was like, oh my God, Tacoma's history has been destroyed. It's so wonderful to know there's still some out there and it can be found. And I had a question that's very specific. I have a very clear memory of, as a child, my dad, who was a policeman in Tacoma, took us to a man's apartment to watch the Daffodil Parade. He lived on Pacific Avenue up in the second story. I just remember it was a very dark apartment. He was very nice, and he was Japanese, and his name was, I believe, Susie, or that's the name they called him. And I believe he owned a Japanese restaurant. And he used to give us rice candy, which certainly wasn't exactly the kind of candy we used to. But we used to go watch the parade at his place. And I never thought about, I'm in a short story class that I just started taking, and I thought, oh my gosh, this would be wonderful to include this kind of information, maybe write a story about that. And I was just curious how on earth, with that one name, could I find out what restaurant he owned? Is that a name that you'd see in Japanese culture? A nickname? Susie? It's probably a mispronunciation.
Right. I mean, a lot of Japanese American folks, particularly after the war, took on like Americanish names or nicknames, or even before the war, even. So you had people with names like Sadie and Bacon and.
So Susie, though, with a man.
Yeah, no, that part is unusual. So I'm guessing it would have been an adaptation of his Japanese name rather than being an actual Japanese name, just off the top of my head. But if you have a sense of where, then I would probably, see if you could go to the polk directories, right, and see if you can look up, right, what if you can find the address.
Some block on Pacific Avenue facing east. I know that.
Yeah, right.
Oh, okay,
right.
thank you.
That would be my hunch.
And then go dig it up in the Northwestern, maybe if there were any articles about
Right,
this
right. Spencer might have other ideas as well, but that's my first instinct.
Yeah, you've got a lot of information to work with there, actually. Yeah, I would say, definitely the city directories. You can even search, and in this document I'm going to send to everybody tonight, it'll show you how to search by block. So you could go onto the buildings index, which is our index for each individual address. If the building's standing or not, it's most likely on there.
I think it is still, yeah.
Okay. Oh, even better.
There's a lot of Tacoma.
Okay, great. And yeah, you can go through those. There's in that region of the city, there'll be a lot of pictures of the buildings with it, just because they've been there for so long. And you can look and just type in like the 1400 block of what street was it? Pacific
Avenue. But see,
Yeah.
I don't know if he lived near the restaurant. It could have been in, my dad grew up in South Tacoma, so he could have known him from South Tacoma, and Susie lived in that. So I guess the starting place for me would be, what would be a Japanese name that Susie could fit with, maybe. And that, because I can't, how on earth would I ever?
Yeah, I would just start with the building itself, because in the directories it'll say the occupants of the building, even if it's a apartment building.
Yeah, and I know the years. Okay.
Yeah, and maybe it is like I don't know if it's a Japanese, but it's SUZI, or maybe it wasn't Susie.
Yeah.
I don't know
sure
if that's a Japanese spelling, but I don't know. You've got a good lead. So and if you want to contact us too, I can help get you started. Oh, somebody just wrote maybe Suzuki.
Well, that's what I was thinking. Like I had a Japanese friend who said it isn't sukiyaki, it's skiyaki.
Oh,
is that wrong? Because we used to say sukiyaki.
Yeah, sukiyaki. So you
compressed,
right? But that's the name of a dish, right?
Right. Yeah. So I mean, I realize the pronunciations can be all wrong. For Americanized versions.
Right.
So yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. And I was wondering if there's any chance, Spencer, if you could show your first two slides again, maybe if there's time.
Oh, sure.
I wanted to get a screenshot because it'll help me research better. And I also wanted to know what kind of volunteer options there are to help with the community project.
That's a great question. If you want to email NWR, I can send you Anna Trammell, my supervisor, who's kind of the head of that project for the libraries portion of that project. I would reach out to her. I don't know right now, because of the pandemic, the limitations on volunteer work, but I'm sure she'll have some way you can be involved, or at least spread the word or get some more information about it.
Okay. And is there any timeline as to when you folks might open up more?
Well, we have appointments right now. They're on Saturdays only. I'll put a link out to that too, but you can also find that at the Northwestern website. Here, let me share the screen.
Okay.
They're Saturday. Oh, you're welcome. They are on, there we go. Saturdays from 10 to 1 and 2 to 5. And you can make an appointment. There's 3 people per appointment block. And you can find that information on the main library website or the Northwestern's or or the homepage, I mean, and the Northwestern's homepage.
Okay.
But they do
this
book
one.
up fast because there's a lot of demand, but I haven't heard as of yet expanding those hours. So.
Okay. I got this slide. Thank you.
Okay. Yep.
And I'd like to just jump in real quick as we're approaching 7:30 and just mention that Spencer's slides, correct me if I'm wrong about this, Spencer, but I believe we'll be emailing these out to everyone who
Great idea.
signed up for tonight's event. So
Yep.
you'll
Okay.
get the slides plus some other resources that have been mentioned throughout the conversation. So if you didn't get everything in the moment, don't worry. We'll make sure you get it after tonight.
Thank you. Didn't mean to monopolize so much time. It's just so exciting.
It's hard not to be excited about this. This kind of research is exciting.
Yeah.
That's the word to spread with everyone.
A tribe of history geeks.
So I think that does bring us to the end of our time. So thank you, Michael and Spencer, all the folks at the library and all the folks at Right 253 for putting this together and hosting us. And thank you to our wonderful panelists. And thank you to everyone who has been here with us. It's really, I think it's been a pleasure to chat and to share some of these ideas and hopefully get more people excited about doing this kind of research. So thank you.
Thanks for moderating, Kim, too.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you
Yes.
so much.
Definitely. Thank you all for joining us this evening. And again, thanks to TPL, of course, for being such a great partner in this. Kim, thank you so much for moderating this conversation. And like I said, I think Sarah's going to send out to all of our registered participants the resources for tonight. But I would definitely encourage everyone to email Spencer often with questions. Sorry, I'm just putting you out there, Spencer.
No, please do. Yeah.
Okay, great. And take advantage of those open hours at the Northwest Room. So, Sarah, any final thoughts before we sign off?
I just wanted to say I'll send those out in the morning, so keep an eye on your email for those details. And if you like to come to these events, keep an eye on Tacoma Public Library's list of events. We do regular writing panels and workshops with Right 253. And thank you for coming, everybody.